This is a Martinus Cosmology podcast. My name is Mary McGovern and I'm your host for today. And I'm very happy to welcome my guest, Anton Jarrod from London, to the Martinus Centre Klint, where we are both taking part in the Translators Week, which is a conference where people translating Martinus's works into various languages meet and hear lectures on translating and discuss translation challenges. And Anton is a writer. He's the author of a book. He is also a researcher on modern spirituality and has been studying Martinus since 2011. Welcome to our podcast, Anton.
Oh, thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
I understand that you find Martinus's works rather original. You have, through your studies, you have seen that Martinus has some original contributions to modern spirituality. What would you say he has that is new?
Yes, well, that's certainly, the topic of today's conversation, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about over the years as I have been exploring the field of spirituality and what people have written about it, both within the religious traditions and also outside of the religious traditions, over the last 150 years or so, as well as part of my interest in theology and philosophy. And I think that I can say with some security that Martinus does have a really truly original contribution to make to human spirituality through his works, and through the breadth and extensiveness of his work. So certainly I could speak to you a little bit about what I think about that.
So could you give an example of something that you find original in Martinus, something you don't find anywhere else?
Definitely. I think the first thing that comes to mind really is what you find in Martinus is a completeness that is found in very few places elsewhere. So what I mean by completeness is the completeness of his works in terms of what they're covering, the completeness of his vision of the spiritual realities, and the completeness of his analyses. So he goes to extraordinary depths to map out the sort of the fringes of his thinking, from a single idea to its completeness. To give the reader a complete analysis of a particular area of the spiritual reality. And I think that this is one of his great strengths, and what he does differently to other writers who tend to not go into so much detail or depth of analysis. And I think this is what makes Martinus's works so extraordinary in terms of their completeness, is that he creates a whole system of thinking which captures every aspect of the spiritual reality in all of its aspects, really. So it is a kind of a complete system, so complete in that way.
Yes, and he calls it a world picture. And by calling it that, he's saying it's very comprehensive. It's not some sort of narrow analysis. It's a universal field he's dealing with.
Yes, that's right. And the word world picture has also a very, very particular meaning, because what Martinus is doing through his works is he's presenting, sort of describing his picture of the world. Now, we all have our own picture of the world. We all have our own worldview, or what in German is I don't know the pronunciation, but Weltanschauung or perspective. So each one of us has our own worldview, which we can't sort of get out of, because that's the view through which we see the world. So Martinus's his job, if you like, was what he's taken it upon himself to do, is to describe his worldview, to describe what he sees from his own experience and his own experience of being alive and being a living being. And that is extremely difficult to do because, as I say, with our worldviews, we only see the world through them. We don't necessarily think about what our worldview is. But here Martinus through his works has kind of mapped out the world as he sees it. And of course he's looking at it from a very different perspective to the average person.
Yes, and he calls it the eternal world picture, which is quite another perspective. I mean, I have my world view, you have your world view, but to say that one has an eternal world view, that's something much larger, wouldn't you think?
Well, it is, and what this means to me is that what he's describing is a picture of the world that is not relative to an individual's perspective. So I look at the world in a certain way, you look in the world at a certain way, and our view of the world is not the same. But what Martinus is saying is that this picture of reality that he's presenting is not relative to any individual perspective. It's describing the basic structure of everything. Now, this is what the philosophers have tried to do. So if you go back in time and you look at the history of philosophy, and you see all the different philosophical systems, what you have is, if you look at Plato or the Aristotelian view of the world, you have an attempt to create both a language and a picture of the world as it is. But of course, this has always been a highly controversial endeavor. And, as each person comes up with a picture of the world, the successive generations come up with a way to say exactly how it isn't like that at all. So, although it's certainly not an original thing to come up with a world picture or to claim that it has an eternal basis in reality, it may stand the test of time if and how people discover that actually this is a very good representation of how the universe actually is. So in a way, whether and how much of an original contribution that is remains to be seen. But certainly I think he's got a good shot.
Yes, and Martinus really encouraged his readers to challenge his ideas and test them against their own experience of life, see if it fits. And he said again and again, take what you can use and leave the rest. So he wasn't interested in persuading people that he was right. He wanted to be able to have a very scientific attitude to his analyses. Yes. And not set aside their own intellectual abilities. Yes,
that's right. And this is where you see sort of Martinus's works fitting into the context of the work that was going on in the 20th century, following the kind of the sort of Enlightenment disestablishment of religion. So religion had sort of become less of a force in people's lives, sort of through the 19th century with the evolution theory, Darwin and the sort of scientific revolution. And after this time in the West, sort of starting with the work of, Helena Blavatsky and sort of Rudolf Steiner, you had then people beginning to look at look at spiritual realities from a non-religious perspective and sort of encouraging the beginnings of what sort of many have called the spiritual science. Certainly Steiner claimed that his works were spiritual science, something that Martinus also claims for his works. So certainly Martinus is working within a context that is already there, but what his contribution is offering in a different way to what, for instance, the work of Steiner offered or the work of Blavatsky, is that it is completely sort of stripped down or stripped of sort of religious colouring, if you like. Steiner used a lot of references to mythology, so did Blavatsky in the Theosophical movement. So all of their works have this kind of pseudo-religious undertext, subtext to them, whereas Martinus's works are perhaps a little closer to the sort of the analytical kind of approach that you find in philosophy, although philosophy, has gone a different direction since that time. So yeah.
So do you find within Martinus any new concepts you haven't met in any other forms of modern spirituality? Absolutely.
I think that one of the things that what struck me when I came to Martinus's works was I've been sort of researching religion, spirituality, theology, philosophy for 20 years or more. And what I found with Martinus's his works is that he formulates a lot of the principles and ideas that are found throughout the history in new ways, and connects them to other things. And this is really remarkable, and part of his extensive picture connects sort of previously disconnected ideas in history together. So, for example, if we take the concept of the poles, the masculine and feminine poles, well, that's a rather new way of putting this idea of duality, of masculinity and femininity. Where do we find that? Well, actually, in the East, if you look at the concept of yin and yang and the sort of the symbol, the yin and yang symbol, you can see that maybe that is a sort of very early primitive symbol of the poles. But what you find in Martinus is a completely new formulation of this principle. Not only a new formulation, but also symbolized in a different original way. So I've never seen it sort of symbolized, presented graphically in the way that it's presented here. That is this principle. And also you find it extensively described and connected to every other principle in reality. So this is a remarkable achievement to be able to sort of not only see the reality, but to describe it in such a way that is extensive, that people can understand, and that is complete in itself. So certainly, yes, that's one of the
anywhere else where he talks about the macrocosmos, the mesocosmos, and the microcosmos.
Yeah.
I haven't met that in any other form for spirituality, and I see it as having very far-reaching consequences for our behavior. For example, this whole analysis of the microcosmos, which is the wealth of living beings that live within our organism, for example.
Yeah. Yes, this is a good example of how Martinus's original contribution also sits within a context. Because, of course, what you have, if you look at the idea of the three cosmoses, well, there is a very long ancient tradition of thinking about the great chain of being. So this goes back through the alchemical tradition in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It goes back even further to sort of the tradition of Hermes. Hermes and sort of the ancient esoteric writings. I think you can probably find it in Egyptian texts as well. So it's a very old idea of this, that there is this great chain of being and that we are beings living within other beings. However, what's original with Martinus's work, again, is his particular formulation of this principle, of this basic idea that is found in religious teachings and in mythologies and in esoteric writings in so many different ways and often in very confused ways. You can't make head or tail of what is actually being described. But what you find in Martinus is a complete analysis, if you like, in full clarity of what the principle is, how it connects to other things, and how it works in life, in reality, and also how you can, giving you material about how you can possibly work with this idea yourself in life.
Yes, one could say that with his analysis of the three cosmoses, the macrocosmos, mesocosmos, and microcosmos, then he's extended our area of responsibility, because we hear from Christ, for example, that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. But who is our neighbor? And suddenly our neighbor is not just the person sitting next to us, it's also the organs and cells that inhabit our body, and it's also the earth that we live on.
Yeah.
So the whole concept of neighborly love suddenly becomes much more extensive.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I think that what is sort of what Martinus is offering readers through his texts is a sort of a basic kind of thick kind of theoretical approach, which a reader can then adapt and turn into something practical and start thinking about these things in their life without any kind of preparation, really, without any need to really have an awareness of this great historical tradition, or the esoteric tradition, where such ideas might be more familiar to people. He's really not writing for what he says in Lever's Book 1, the specialist. It's not just for the specialists, those who are trained in spiritual thinking, but for everybody. And so what, again, coming back to his original contribution, is that he's really making these approaches to life, this sort of tools for spiritual development available for everyone. And that's kind of very democratic. Before, if you think about it, the sort of the esoteric teachings, even within traditional religion, have all been hidden. They've all been kept secret. Esoteric also means hidden. The alchemical writers in Europe in the Renaissance and Middle Ages put their teachings in such a form that novices or the general public could not understand them. So there was a reason for that, of course, because the authorities there would be serious consequences from the authorities. But also, this was reserved knowledge. This was special knowledge for special people, the chosen people. So what Martinus is doing, he's breaking down all of those barriers, and he's presenting the most profound analyses and sort of what you might call the sort of highest knowledge in a form that absolutely anybody can approach. And I think that is a wonderful and masterful contribution.
And he's very good at making things simple. If you think of this idea of microcosmos, I remember a lecture he gave where he talked about the responsibility women feel for the fetus growing in them if they're pregnant. And they might think about their diet, they might stop smoking or drinking alcohol, they might make sure they get enough sleep and exercise. So they feel a great responsibility for this one new being that's growing within them. But he said, we are all pregnant. There are millions of living beings that have their life within us. And he encourages us to feel the same responsibility for all of those. It's a very simple picture.
Yeah.
Anybody can put themselves in the position of someone who's a very easy way of doing it.
It is, and for a lot of people, it's a very novel way to think about your life and your body. But certainly, it's a lot of people are beginning to think about themselves and their surroundings and their bodies in that way. And what Martinus's works do is they give a kind of the right word is theoretical basis. They give a theoretical basis for thinking about these things, but in a way that's not exclusive to only trained philosophers or sort of spiritual adepts. It gives the man on or the woman on the street an opportunity to think about life in this different way.
Some people have been tempted to rewrite Martinus's ideas in more scientific terminology to make it accessible to scientists. Martinus's response to this was, well, scientists are not more stupid than the rest of the population, so can't they read what I've written as it's written?
Well, yes, and it's a good joke in a way, but it's a good thing to say. But there is something that is also to be said about how these two worlds are very separate and are very far apart from each other, and although it's what you find is it's not just a case of reading a book to get understanding, is that there's a whole bridge that you have to cross, which is about development. And so the spiritual world, those who are interested in spirituality, and the scientific academic world, which I I kind of step in both of those, they are not connected. There is no bridge between them, and that will take time. So the language that the sort of scientific world wants to hear, and the formulation of it, is not necessarily how Martinus has put it. So I can understand the desire to sort of translate, if you like, or put the formulations in a different way, but I don't necessarily think that would work, because they're two different paths in a way, and what would be good if people from either path sort of met in the middle.
Yes, and this is what the Martinus Institute is doing to some extent with its conferences.
Great. Yeah.
So we have invited people who work scientifically with various areas.
Absolutely, and then you'll find that people who are interested in sort of alternative thinking, which is perhaps written in a different way, that people will find ways to connect it to what they know, and in this way, organically, that there can be a sort of a communication between two. You find it all the time with philosophers or people on the fringes of their fields. Over time, become more engaged with the orthodoxy. But for now, I think they are still quite far apart, the world of science and Martinus's works.
So you said something about Martinus's analysis being very extensive. Do you find that they have a particular quality that attracts you to them?
Yes, and I think that certainly one of the aspects of Martinus's works is the quality of his works. By quality, I mean the care with which they are written, the quality of the language, the quality of the analyses. So what I'm thinking of here particularly is if you go to sort of a typical bookshop in England anyway, and you look at the sort of spirituality section, what you find is, by comparison, a lot of low quality thought about spirituality. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and people are just doing what they want, what they want, what they feel they want to communicate. So there's nothing wrong with that. But there are, and I don't want to introduce the idea of hierarchy either, because it's, everyone's got something to contribute. But what you find in Martinus's works is this really highest quality of thinking. So being able to look at a concept or explain a principle from so many different angles and connect it to other things across many decades of writing very consistently without making an error really in the analysis, so that things fit together through this long period of writing, is remarkable. And you often find that people change their ideas and their thinking, their formulations over time. So you find that there is this enormous quality of structure and language, which you don't find in other works.
Yes, and in a way it's rather extraordinary that there is no development in Martinus's works over the years. He started writing in 1921. The first book was published in 1932. It's the same world picture. It's the same ideas at the end of his life as there was at the beginning.
Yes.
Perhaps you could say there's a slight evolution in the language, because the first books, Livets, the Book of Life, Volume 1, and The Ideal Food, which were the first things he wrote, they have very long sentences, and there's a slight tendency for his sentences to get a bit shorter, because he got to know his audience and understood that these long sentences could be a bit of a problem, but he didn't shorten them very much. But of Livets, and Volume 4, he published them in subscription. So he wrote 16 pages and published them. So and these books are very thick, but he dared to publish 16 pages at a time before he'd written the rest of it. Which
shows extraordinary commitment to his ideas and to extraordinary commitment to giving out these ideas without thinking, oh well, I'll change that next time. Once you put it out there, that's it. So this it shows that Martinus was not describing what he thought so much as he was describing what he saw. And it was his worldview that he's describing, his picture of reality as he sees it and experiences it. So it's not in the sense of being So it's not in the sense of being a sort of this is what I think about life, a sort of theoretical formulation, but this is what I'm seeing, and yes, that's why it's remarkably consistent, which gives it this strong sense of validity and veracity. It has this truth quality to it, because he's talking about what he's saying, what he's seeing rather, and it's remarkably consistent. So certainly people can say, well, in a way, well, that is a reliable presentation of what this person is seeing.
And you see in an article in Cosmos from 1933, he made a symbol of the structure of Livets, because he had published Volume 1, and people mistakenly thought that was the whole work. But he knew he had much more to say, and he drew this symbol to show that Volume 1, most of it, only the second 2 chapters are not part of the introduction. So the rest of the book is an introduction to Livets, the Book of Life. So from the beginning, he had the whole work in his head, so to speak. He had the whole structure. But I find it's extraordinary that he could publish 16 pages at a time, at least with Volume 4 and 5, and publish them in Cosmos. What other writer would dare to publish the first 16 pages of a book when they hadn't written the rest? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it shows great conviction and security and self-assuredness in your own view of life, and that is something that a lot of other, perhaps esoteric writers don't necessarily have to the same degree. I mean, you find that, of course, writers like Rudolf Steiner were also immensely confident in their own vision of the world, but they also expressed doubts.
about what about the doubts about the nature of the human condition and what it can, what you can know, and so it's very different when you get Martinus's works.
And one other unique thing about Martinus's works is his symbols.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. The symbols is a huge original contribution, I think, in being able to turn the sort of most abstract, difficult to see with the senses realities into something physical and visible, graphic, is a remarkable achievement. Being able to communicate the connections between these different principles and ideas in a visual language, in a visual form, a pictorial form, is a remarkable achievement, I think.
Yes, and I think it ties in with what you said earlier, that these analyses are not for the chosen few, they're for the masses, or those among the masses who feel a need for them. And his idea was to make these spiritual ideas and laws and principles readily accessible without any particular training. Absolutely,
yeah. And again, it comes back to this sort of this very democratic approach to giving out the analyses in another form that people can readily see. I mean, I'm thinking of how that sort of in the history of the church, in the great cathedrals, you had these master craftsmen presenting in stained glass the pictures of the stories of the Bible that people could, that the person who wasn't able to read or write could see for themselves, what was the relationship between good and evil, the relationship between God and the Son. So you have, of course, there's this context in which the sort of the visual presentation of spiritual analyses has been done, if you like. But what's original with Martinus is that, of course, this is one person presenting a whole world picture in a pictorial form. And again, his pictorial analysis is very consistent, very sort of comprehensive, and gives readers another way into understanding his analyses.
In your book, you focus very much on how Martinus's ideas and teachings are applied to the Gospels.
Yes.
I wonder why you took that approach.
Yes. Well, one of the big things about Martinus's endeavor and one of the sort of great aspects of his mission is to sort of reinterpret religion, more specifically to reinterpret Christianity and the life of Christ. And throughout his whole works, he's constantly referring to the Bible, to both context, the biblical teachings, but also his one of his sort of missions is to demonstrate how Jesus, the figure of leading figure in the New Testament, is this sort of archetypal real human being. And so this is such a big theme, and also it's such a part of the movement of the 20th century to reinterpret Christianity. And sort of all the esoteric writers do it. You've got Blavatsky doing it in 1888 with the esoteric Gospels. You've got John P. Scott doing sort of a reinterpretation of the Gospels in a sort of in a different light. And so Martinus's work here is not necessarily original in that sense, but what he does is he radically reinterprets the sort of the Christian scriptures. He radically reinterprets the New Testament, and he connects these radical reinterpretations to his principles, to the principles of reality that he's seeing through his consciousness. So it's a very deep and rich topic. And so, yes, what I wanted to do was to look at, present a sort of run through of the life of Christ as it is in the Gospels, and looking at what can be said about that life and how it relates to the cosmos and to Martinus's presentation of the evolution of a human being, which is towards cosmic consciousness.
Yes, and according to Martinus, that's where we're all heading. We're all heading towards becoming cosmically conscious.
Yes.
And he said that Christ's behavior was the great model for us. If we could all behave as well as Christ did, then we would be there already.
Yes.
So, as one of my friends said, it takes a long time to reach a stage where you can allow yourself to be crucified without getting slightly irritated.
Yes.
And Christ managed to hang from a cross and forgive his enemies, forgive those who were crucifying him. So that's a goal to be reached.
Yes, that's right. And in that way, for Martinus, he presented the ideal way of behaving with regard to other people, with regard to your fate, to your surroundings, or with regard to your fate, to your surroundings, and this ideal way of behaving is something that is evolving. So this idea of evolution as well, and the evolution of cosmic consciousness, is really coming in at a time when ideas about evolution and ideas about higher consciousness are really starting to flourish in the West. You've got that book by Richard Buck, I think, in 1905, Cosmic Consciousness.
Yes.
So, people are thinking about, you've got the Theosophical movement, the Anthroposophical movements, and sort of the influx of religious ideas and teachings from the East about different higher states of being and nirvana and planes of existence. And Martinus comes in this real field of this mishmash of these two kind of areas coming together, and really kind of sews it all up. He really connects everything, connecting all of the dots. And again, this is a wonderful, a remarkable achievement, because he's sort of presenting a kind of a master key to all of these disparate ideas. But certainly evolution is an enormous topic, sort of coming on the back of the whole kind of awakening that human beings have had about the fact of evolution in terms of physical evolution since the sort of work of Darwin and others. That what Martinus is bringing then is that that's not the whole picture. Physical evolution is just one part of the story, and he brings in this whole kind of analysis of all of these other aspects to evolution.
Actually,
Namely spiritual evolution.
And I must say, for me, one of the things that I was really grateful for, I'm very grateful for, that he makes it very clear that spiritual evolution is actually the same as moral evolution.
Yeah.
So if you want to expand your consciousness, if you want to become aware of these laws and principles that govern the universe, the only way is to behave better.
Yes.
That is the path, rather than special techniques or whatever.
Yes, and that's right. And in a way, this is what is the real sort of key, if you like, to all of the religious traditions and all of the sort of religious teachings, which have at their heart moral training. But what you find is that, of course, all of these different traditions link their connect, but in Christianity and Buddhism and in newer religions as well. What Martinus is trying to do is to sort of disconnect, or not necessarily disconnect, but to show how that moral development, that moral training can happen outside of that religious tradition. And in fact, as you know, he talks about that the real development happens once you've gone through the stages of religiousness. So what he's doing is offering his readers and those who are interested in such analyses a way of development that is independent of religion. And I think that this is tapping into the real heart of the 20th century and this century, that people have, especially in the Western world, sort of a large number of people have moved away from the religious idea of moral training, and using works like these, there's an opportunity to develop in a moral way, independent of religious community or teaching.
In a way, he elevates life to a religion. He talks about the religion of life itself, and he talks about the process of initiation in the pyramid of daily life. So he talks about the direct speech of life, that life is talking to us through everything we experience.
Yeah.
So in a way, he elevates daily life to a kind of religion in itself.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a key thing as well, because often what you find in the religious traditions is that the sort of elevated goal, or the goal of human history, is somewhere else. It's beyond where we are now, and now is something that we've got to escape. Whereas for Martinus, now is where it's at. It really is. It's in where you find yourself in the moment is where your highest development is, and that's where the sort of the mystery is unfolded. And there's wonderful kind of analyses of how you connect to the book of life in life. And what I'm thinking of right now is particularly useful for today's sort of age is his analysis of sexuality, and how that is so important for people today. Is that we've traditionally thought of sexuality as being being something that is either kept away from spirituality or is dangerously bound up with it, or in terms of sort of the moral kind of police, sort of in terms of the moral code, if you like, for sexuality, is that it's that there are things that about us that we need to be ashamed of. That we can't connect to and hide, that we must sort of hide under the carpet, if you like. Whereas Martinus sort of really goes into great detail about this whole area of human life, sexuality, and connects it to the moral development and the spiritual development and the development of cosmic consciousness. They are absolutely integral and intimately related. So a lot of people have questions about their own sexuality, or about the sexuality of other people, or about sexuality in society, and all of this comes into the world picture that Martinus presents. He doesn't sort of shy away from it at all, and his treatment of sexuality, I think, is rather unique in the tradition. I don't think anybody else goes into as much detail and connects it to so many things as Martinus. I haven't read his works, but there's a writer from South America, Samuel War, I think he's called, who writes a lot about sexuality and spirituality, or used to. I think he's dead now. But from what I can gather, it's sort of a lot of the ideas were really sort of distorted and rather led to rather unfortunate conclusions. But for Martinus, sexuality is a beautiful aspect of life that that deeply connects to everything. The whole of life is sex in a way, in a kind of in a kind of analytical way of everything being connected and everything being creative.
So on that note, I think we'll stop here, and I'll say thank you very much to you, Anton Jarrod, for joining us here at the Martinus Cosmology podcast. If anyone wants to find Anton's book, you can look on his homepage, which is antonjarrod.com. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.